The speech was 11 minutes long. Adanna Cole knew this because she had been counting. Not deliberately. She was not a woman who counted things as a rule, had never needed the specific discipline of numbers to manage her emotions, but because somewhere in the third minute, when it became clear that the speech was going to be longer than she had expected and that she was going to have to sit through the full length of it with her hands in her lap and her face arranged correctly, she had started counting. The way you count when you need something to do with the part of your mind that is not listening. The wedding was beautiful. She had known it would be beautiful. Nina was a woman who did things well, who brought the same focused competence to everything she touched, and who had spent 14 months planning an occasion that reflected exactly the life she intended to build. The flowers were extraordinary. The lighting was warm and specific, the kind of lighting that makes everyone in a room look like the best version of themselves. The food had been exceptional. The guests, 300 of them, the particular cross-section of Lagos's professional world that James had accumulated across 20 years of building his company, were dressed with the specific intentionality of people who understand that a wedding of this scale is also a performance of belonging. Adanna had worn her best wrapper. The one Sola had given her 3 birthdays before she died. Deep burgundy with gold threading, the kind of fabric that takes years to find and longer to afford. She had pressed it herself that morning in the spare room of her sister's flat, where she had been staying since she moved out of her own place 6 months ago to give the new couple room to settle. She had pressed it, and she had done her hair, and she had put on the earrings that had been her mother's, and she had looked in the mirror and she had thought, "This is a good day. Whatever else it is a good day. James has found someone. The children will have a mother in the house again. This is a good day." She had believed this as recently as the 3rd minute of Nina's speech. Nina was good at speeches. She had the particular gift of a woman who spent her professional life crafting messages for other people. She knew how to build to a point, how to vary her rhythm, how to make a room laugh and then bring them back to something warmer. She had talked about James with the specific, honest tenderness of a woman who had chosen someone carefully and was not embarrassed to say why. She had talked about the children with genuine warmth, about getting to know them, about what it meant to her to be joining a family that already had such a clear sense of itself. She had made the room laugh twice and produced tears in at least 4 people that Adanna could identify from her seat near the back. And then, at the 9th minute, Nina had paused. She had looked down at her notes and she had looked back up and she had said, "I want to take a moment to thank the people who held this family together while James was finding his way back to himself, his friends who showed up, his colleagues who carried extra weight, and the children's nanny, Mrs. Cole, who was such a wonderful support during a very difficult time and who is here with us tonight." The room had applauded. Adanna had looked at the tablecloth. The tablecloth was white with small embroidered gold details at the edges. The embroidery was the kind of work that required patience, small, precise, repetitive. She looked at it for the 2 minutes that remained of the speech, and then for the several minutes that followed while other people spoke and the room moved through its evening, and she held her glass and she thought about what had just happened with the specific, unhurried attention of a woman who has spent 60 years learning not to react to things before she has understood them. The nanny, Mrs. Cole. Wonderful support during a very difficult time. She turned the words over. Not with anger. Anger was not the first thing. Anger would come later and it would be clean and it would pass. What came first was something quieter than anger and in some ways more significant. The specific feeling of a person who has been standing in a room for 7 years and has just been told, by the shape of someone else's words, that they were never quite visible enough to be seen clearly. She set her glass down. She picked up her bag. She stood. She walked through the wedding hall, past the tables of guests who were now eating and talking and not paying particular attention to a woman in a burgundy wrapper moving toward the exit, and she pushed open the heavy door and she walked out into the Lagos evening. The air outside was warm and complete. Lagos at night, doing what it always did, present, indifferent, entirely unbothered by what was happening in one wedding hall in one corner of it. She stood on the steps for a moment. She looked at the street. She thought, "I am not going back in." She called her sister. Her sister answered on the second ring, because her sister always answered. "Come and get me," Adanna said. A pause. Now, Adanna said. Her sister did not ask why. Her sister had been not asking why for 30 years with the specific, practiced patience of someone who understands that the why will arrive in its own time and that what is needed right now is simply the presence. "I am coming," her sister said. Adanna sat on the steps of the wedding hall and she waited, and the Lagos evening held her the way evenings hold people who have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. And she did not go back inside, and nobody came out to find her. Nobody came out to find her. She sat with that for a while. Sola had been 31 when she died. This was the thing Adanna returned to most often in the years that followed. Not the illness itself, which had been fast and merciless and had compressed 5 years of anticipated grief into 4 months of present grief, but the number, 31. The specific, impossible smallness of it. The fact that Sola had been younger, at the end, than Adanna had been when she had Sola. That Sola had not lived long enough to understand what it meant to have someone who would do anything for you. That she had died before she understood this, which meant she had died without fully understanding her mother. Adanna thought about this often. She did not think about it with self-pity. Self-pity was not a mode she had ever found useful, and she had tested this conclusion thoroughly across 60 years of living. She thought about it with the specific, clear-eyed grief of a woman who has understood that some things are simply true and that understanding them does not make them less heavy, only more correctly weighted. Sola had been 31. She had been a secondary school biology teacher, which Adanna had always thought was exactly right. Sola had inherited her mother's quality of explaining things clearly and her father's patience, and she had the specific gift of making young people understand that the world they lived in was governed by laws that were interesting rather than arbitrary. She had been teaching for 6 years when she died. Her students had come to the funeral in numbers that made the church overflow onto the street, which told you something about the kind of teacher she had been. She had married James Obi at 26. Adanna had liked James from the beginning, had liked him in the careful, provisional way that mothers like their daughters' husbands before they have had time to understand them fully. He was self-made, which Adanna respected. He had started his logistics company from a small office in Surrey with 2 staff members and a van, and by the time he married Sola he had 43 staff members and a fleet of 12 vehicles, and the particular quality of a man who has built something real and knows exactly what it cost. He was not warm in the conventional sense. He expressed care through action rather than words, which Adanna understood because she was the same way. He loved her daughter in a manner that was visible without being performed, which was the most important thing. They had been married for 5 years when Sola became ill. The illness was swift and thorough and did not leave room for preparation. 1 month Sola was complaining of fatigue that she attributed to the end of term. 3 months later she was in hospital. 1 month after that she was gone. The speed of it was, in some ways, a mercy. Adanna had watched other people's losses stretch across years, and she understood that long dying had its own particular cost. But speed was not comfort. Speed was just speed. It did not change what was at the end of it. Adanna had been with her when she died. James had been there. Zara, at 11, had been kept outside the room with her grandmother on her mother's side, which was the right decision. Marcus, at 8, had been asleep at home with a neighbor. Lily, at 2, had been at home also, not yet old enough to understand what hospitals meant or what the particular quality of a waiting room at 3 in the morning meant to the adults sitting in it. Adanna had held her daughter's hand. She had said the things that needed to be said. She did not think about those things often. They were between her and Sola, and they did not require an audience, even an internal one. What she thought about was the next morning. What she thought about was coming out of the hospital into the Lagos dawn, that specific dawn, gray and warm, the city already in motion, and understanding with complete clarity that there were 3 children in the world who no longer had a mother, and that their father was a man who was capable of many things and was currently incapable of most of them, and that someone was going to have to hold this together. She had not decided in that moment. She had simply known. There was a difference. The decision, if it could be called that, if the word decision applied to something that felt less like a choice and more like a recognition, happened 3 days after the funeral. James was sitting in the kitchen of the house that he and Sola had chosen together, in the chair that had always been his chair at the kitchen table, and he was not doing anything. He was not reading. He was not on his phone. He was not eating. He was sitting in his chair in the way of a man who has gone to the kitchen because he thought he was supposed to want something and has arrived and discovered that he does not want anything, that wanting things requires a quantity of forward momentum that he does not currently possess. Zara was in her room. She had been in her room for 2 days, coming out only for food that she did not finish. She was 11, old enough to understand everything that had happened and not old enough to know what to do with understanding it. Adanna had checked on her twice. The second time, Zara had said very quietly, "When is it going to stop hurting?" Adanna had sat on the edge of her bed and said, "I do not know, but I can promise you that it changes. The shape of it changes." Zara had looked at her with her mother's eyes and said nothing, and Adanna had stayed until she fell asleep. Marcus was with his other grandmother, James's mother, a warm and entirely overwhelmed woman who loved her grandchildren and was managing her own grief and her son's at the same time, and who had looked at Adanna across the kitchen that morning with the expression of someone carrying more than their weight and understanding that they are not the right person for this particular load. Lily was in the sitting room, playing with something, too small to know anything except that the adults around her were sad and that her mother had not come home. Adanna looked at James sitting in his chair looking at nothing. She put her bag down. She went to the kitchen and she made breakfast. Not for herself, not because she was hungry, but because someone needed to make breakfast and it was 8:30 in the morning and the children would need to eat whether the world had ended or not. When she put the plate in front of James, he looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You do not have to," he started. "I know," she said, and went back to the stove. She had her own flat. She had her own life, a carefully constructed retirement life, built over the 3 years since she had stepped down as principal of the secondary school she had run for 12 years. She had her books and her garden and the Thursday afternoon group at her church that she had been attending for 9 years and the particular quality of quiet that a person earns after decades of a busy life. She had given a lot of herself to a lot of people for a long time and she had arrived, finally, at a version of her days that belonged to her. She sublet the flat 2 weeks after the funeral. She called the Thursday group and explained that she would be absent for a while. She packed a bag. Not a temporary bag, a proper bag, the kind of packing that acknowledges a real duration, and she moved into the room at the end of the corridor in James's house, the room that had always been described as the guest room but that she had always thought of privately as her room since she was the only guest who had ever used it. She did not tell James she was staying permanently. She did not announce a plan or establish terms or ask for anything in return. She simply began. Breakfast at 7. School run at 8. Whatever needed to happen in the hours between. Dinner at 6:30. The specific, unglamorous, irreplaceable architecture of a day with children in it. The children noticed. Children always notice the things that adults announce least. Zara came down for breakfast on the third morning and found Adanna at the stove and said nothing, but the quality of the nothing was different, the specific quality of a person who has been waiting for something to be stable and has recognized in a small and ordinary way that it now is. Marcus started sleeping through the night again in the 3rd week, which had not been happening before. Lily said mama one afternoon to Adanna's retreating back as she left the sitting room and then, when Adanna stopped and turned around, looked at her with the calm assessing eyes of a 2-year-old who has decided something and is not yet sure if it will be accepted. Adanna looked at her for a moment. She went back and picked her up. She did not correct her. James came back to himself over the course of the 1st year. This was the only way Adanna could describe it. Came back to himself. Not recovered, which implied a before and an after and a return to the same place. He came back to himself in the way that a person who has been very far away gradually becomes present again, through increments so small that you cannot identify any single one as the turning point, only look back at some distance and understand that the direction has changed. He went back to work at the 5-month mark. He came home earlier than he had before the illness, which was not a small thing. Adanna had heard the stories from Sola of the hours James kept during the building years, the particular quality of a driven man's relationship to the clock. He came home at a reasonable hour and he sat with the children for dinner and he asked them about their days with the specific, present attention of a man who is working very hard at the act of being present and is succeeding more days than not. He was grateful to Adanna. He expressed this badly and irregularly, the way that people express gratitude for things that have become structural, the way you do not thank the floor for holding your weight because the floor has become the floor and you have stopped noticing. He said once, at the kitchen table when the children were in bed, that he did not know what he would have done without her. She had said, "Then we do not need to talk about it." He had looked at her with the expression of a man who understands that this is not generosity but instruction, and had nodded. She was not doing it for gratitude. She had been clear with herself about this from the beginning. She was doing it for Sola's children. For Zara's sleep and Marcus's night terrors and Lily's first word. She was doing it because someone had to do it and she was the person available and willing, and because she had decided in the kitchen 3 days after the funeral that she was going to do it completely. Adanna Cole did not do things halfway. But she was also honest enough with herself to understand that completely is a word that has no specified endpoint, and that somewhere in the 3rd year, when Lily started school and Marcus started secondary school and Zara became the kind of teenager who had opinions about everything and expressed them with the specific directness that was entirely Sola, Adanna had looked at the life she was living and understood that she was not visiting anymore. This was her life. The children were hers in every practical sense. The house was hers in every functional sense. Her savings were diminished and her retirement plans were postponed, and her Thursday group had filled her spot with someone else. She had given, across 3 years, what would have taken most people 5 to give, and she had done it without complaint and without performance and without once suggesting that anyone should notice. She had thought James noticed. She had been wrong about the degree. James brought Nina home on a Tuesday evening in October, 14 months before the wedding. Adanna was in the kitchen making the particular groundnut soup that Marcus had requested for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, which was how she knew he was going through something at school and needed comfort food rather than a conversation about it. Because Marcus had always been the child who communicated his emotional state through food preferences rather than words. James had called ahead, which he did, always, when he was bringing someone home, because Adanna had established this as a requirement in the 2nd year, and he had respected it without requiring an explanation. So she knew someone was coming. She did not know who. She had not asked. They came through the door at 7:30. Nina was 35 at the time, tall, warm brown skin. The particular contained energy of a person who is paying attention to everything and has learned to make this look effortless. She was dressed well without being formal. She looked at the house the way people look at houses they are visiting for the first time when they already know they are going to have feelings about the house, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who understands that a house tells you things about a person that the person themselves may not have told you yet. She looked at the photographs on the wall, at Sola in the frame above the bookshelf, at the children's artwork that Adanna had framed and hung along the corridor when she realized that James was keeping it in a folder in a drawer and that it deserved better than a drawer. "This is my mother-in-law," James said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Adanna Cole, Sola's mother. Adanna wiped her hands on her wrapper and turned around. "Mrs. Cole," Nina said warmly, "James has told me so much about you. You've been such an incredible support to the family." Adanna looked at her. Nina's face was entirely genuine, open, warm, expressing exactly what it was expressing without agenda or management. She was not performing. She simply did not know. "I am their grandmother," Adanna said, gently, clearly. "I live here." "Of course," Nina said and smiled. "I should have said, James has mentioned how much you help out." "Help out?" Adanna turned back to the soup. She told herself, standing at the stove with her back to the room. She does not know. She has been given a version of this story that is incomplete, and she is working from that version, and she cannot know what she does not know. She is not malicious. She is simply uninformed. This was true. She believed it. She continued to believe it across the 14 months that followed, across the dinners and the Sunday visits and the family occasions at which Nina was present with increasing frequency, and at which the word nanny or helper or support appeared with a regularity that Adanna noted and corrected each time, and that continued anyway, not from cruelty but from the specific, durable power of a story that has been told a certain way for long enough to have become the shape of the truth in the minds of the people telling it. Adanna said it when it needed to be said and let it go when it did not. She was not a woman who insisted on her own importance. She was not doing this to be seen. But she was also not, she understood now, sitting on the steps of a wedding hall in her best wrapper in the Lagos evening, waiting for her sister to come and collect her. She was not invisible. She had simply allowed herself to be treated as if she were. And that was not the same thing. Her sister's car appeared at the end of the street. Adanna stood. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the headlights and she did not look back at the wedding hall, and she got in the car and her sister looked at her face in the particular way of a woman who has loved someone for 60 years and knows what that face looks like when it has arrived at a decision. "What happened?" her sister said. Adanna looked at the street ahead. "She called me the nanny," she said. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then she started the car. Her sister's name was Grace, and she had been right about most things for 60 years and had the particular quality of a person who has been right about most things for a long time. She did not say "I told you so," because she understood that "I told you so" was a way of making someone else's pain about your own accuracy, and she had never been interested in that particular satisfaction. What she did instead was make tea. Adanna sat at her sister's kitchen table and Grace made tea and did not speak, and the Lagos night moved outside the window and Adanna looked at her hands. The hands that had ironed school uniforms and plaited Lily's hair and stirred groundnut soup for a family that was not technically hers and had always been entirely hers, and she thought about the word nanny. Not about Nina. She was not thinking about Nina with anger. Nina had said what she had been given to say, had used the language that had been put in her hand by a version of events that was incomplete. The nanny, Mrs. Cole. Wonderful support during a very difficult time. She was thinking about James. She was thinking about the specific shape of James's understanding of the last 7 years. Not because she needed him to understand it. She had not done any of it to be understood. But because there was a difference between not needing to be understood and being comfortable with being misrepresented. She had not named this difference clearly enough across 7 years, and the result was a speech at a wedding that had described her contribution the way you describe a piece of furniture that has served its purpose, warmly, briefly, and in the past tense. Grace set the tea in front of her. She sat down. "Tell me," she said. So Adanna told her. Not the speech. She had already told her the speech in the car in 7 words, and Grace had understood the 7 words. She told her the fuller thing. The 14 months of Nina. The small corrections that did not hold. The specific quality of being introduced repeatedly as someone who had helped out rather than someone who had held things together. The particular experience of watching a story about yourself be told incorrectly in your presence, over and over, by people who are not malicious and are simply working from insufficient information that you have not been given the full invitation to correct. Grace listened. She did not interrupt. When Adanna finished, Grace was quiet for a moment in the way of a person assembling the most honest and useful thing they can say rather than the first thing that has arrived. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I do not know yet," Adanna said. "But I am not going back tonight." "Tonight," Grace repeated. The specific weight of that word, the implication that tonight had a boundary beyond which other decisions would need to be made. "I need to think," Adanna said. Grace nodded. She got up and went to the spare room and made up the bed with the specific efficiency of a woman who has been making up beds for other people since she was old enough to tuck in a sheet. And when she came back she said, "The room is ready." And she went to bed herself. Because she understood that what Adanna needed right now was not conversation but space. And that the most loving thing she could offer was the room and the tea and her presence in the next room and the certainty that nothing was required of Adanna tonight except to be present in her own feelings without performing them for anyone. Adanna sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. She thought about Sola. She thought about Lily saying mama to her retreating back and the way she had turned around and picked her up without correcting her. She thought about Marcus's night terrors in year 2. The specific sound of him, the specific voice she had developed for sitting outside his door, the particular way he had of reaching for her hand in the dark without fully waking, and the way she had learned to give it without saying anything because saying anything would wake him, and what he needed was the hand, not the voice. She thought about Zara at 11. In the room with her mother's eyes asking when it was going to stop hurting. She thought about James sitting in his kitchen chair looking at nothing. She thought about all of it. The full, specific, unglamorous texture of 7 years of another person's life that she had held together with her own hands, and she understood something she had been circling for months without landing on it directly. She had done all of it freely. She had done none of it for recognition. She had never needed James to make a speech about her or to tell people what she had given or to frame her contribution in language that reflected its full weight. She was not that kind of woman, and she had never pretended to be. But freely given was not the same as invisibly given. And invisible was not the same as small. She had allowed the story of her contribution to become the nanny's story because she had been too proud to insist on her own correct description and too tired to have the conversation and too committed to the children to do anything that might disrupt the stability she had built. She had made herself invisible in the service of a household that had then described her as invisible. This was not James's fault only. This was something she had participated in through her silence. She sat with this. Then she picked up her tea, which was cold, and she drank it anyway, because wasting tea was not something she had ever been able to do regardless of circumstances. She went to the spare room. She slept. She did not call James the next morning, or the morning after that, or the week after that. She had told herself, sitting at her sister's kitchen table at 2 in the morning, that she needed time to think before she said anything, and this was true. She had spent 60 years saying things at the correct time rather than the first available time, and she was not about to abandon this practice because she was hurt. Hurt was not a reason to be imprecise. Hurt was information. It required processing before it became action. What she had not fully predicted was how long the processing would take. Took 3 months. Not because she was indecisive. Indecision was not a mode she had ever inhabited for long. But because the thing she was deciding was not simple. She was deciding what the rest of her life was going to look like. She was deciding whether the version of herself that had given 7 years to a household without adequately defending the terms of that giving was a version she was willing to continue living in. She was deciding what it meant at 58 to start over, not from nothing because she was not a woman who had nothing, but from a different arrangement than the one she had been living. These were not decisions that could be made in a week. She went back to basics. She found a flat. Not the old one, which had been sublet for so long that the tenant had made it their own in ways that would take months to untangle, but a new one, smaller and in a different neighborhood, 2 floors up with a window that looked over a quiet street and let in the morning light in a way that she found, after the first week, unexpectedly restorative. She furnished it simply. She bought new dishes, her own dishes, chosen entirely according to her own preferences without reference to what was already in anyone else's kitchen. She bought a plant. She bought 2. She spent an afternoon arranging her books on shelves and discovered, in the arranging of them, that she had more books than she had realized and that she had been intending to read most of them for years and that now, finally, there was no reason not to. She called the church. She asked about the Thursday group. The woman who answered told her warmly that her spot had been filled but that she was welcome to come and there was always room. She went the following Thursday. She sat with women she had not sat with properly in 7 years, and she listened to them and she talked and she felt the specific, accumulated pleasure of being known by people who had known her before the last version of herself had taken over. She cooked for herself. This was the simplest and most significant change. For 7 years she had cooked for a household of 5. Adjusted quantities, managed preferences, tracked the particular food moods of 3 children who each communicated differently through what they would and would not eat. She now cooked for 1. She made what she wanted. She ate at whatever time she pleased. She discovered that she liked eating late, at 9 or 10 in the evening, which was a preference she had entirely suppressed for 7 years because children's schedules do not accommodate it. She was not happy in any simple sense. She did not believe in simple happiness at 58. She had lived long enough to understand that simple happiness was a young person's category, that what replaced it in later life was something more layered and more durable, something that had satisfaction and purpose and presence in it rather than the sharp, uncomplicated pleasure that youth mistakes for the only form of good. She was building something. She was rebuilding, more precisely, returning to the shape of a life that had been hers before she gave it over, and discovering in the returning that the shape had changed, that she had changed, that 7 years of complete giving had produced in her something she had not had before. She was not sure yet what to call it. She was in no hurry. The children called. Zara called first the morning after the wedding. Adanna answered. Zara said, "Mama Adanna, are you all right?" Adanna said, "I am well." Zara was quiet for a moment and then said, "I saw you leave." Adanna said, "I know." Another pause. Then Zara said, "I am glad you left." Her voice carried the specific weight of a young woman who has something larger to say and is holding it for the right moment. Adanna heard this. She said, "Come and see me when you are ready." Zara said, "I will." Marcus called 2 days later. He was 15 and he called the way 15-year-old boys call people they love and are not sure how to reach. In the evening, slightly too casually, asking about nothing in particular for several minutes before arriving at the actual question, which was, "Are you coming back?" Adanna said, "I am not coming back the way I was before." He was quiet. She said, "But I am not going anywhere. I am here." He said okay in the way of a boy who means something more than okay. She said, "I know." Lily called 4 days after the wedding, which meant someone had helped her dial the number, which meant either James or one of the older children had understood enough to make a phone available. She said, "Mama, when are you coming home?" Adanna closed her eyes for a moment. She said, "I am at my own home, my love. I have my own home now." Lily was quiet in the way of a 9-year-old processing something that does not fit the categories she has available. Then she said, "Can I visit?" Adanna said, "You can visit whenever you like." Lily said okay and then said, "I love you." Adanna said, "I love you too. I will always love you." And she meant it in the specific absolute way that she had meant everything she had ever said to those children. Completely without qualification, without the smallest reservation. James did not call. She had expected this. James was a man who processed through silence before he processed through words, and this had been true across the entire 12 years she had known him. Through the business years when things went wrong, through the illness years, through the grief years. He went quiet before he went anywhere else. She had always understood this about him. She understood that he was in his silence now, sitting with what had happened and what it meant, and that he would emerge from it eventually or he would not, and that either outcome was his to navigate and not hers to manage. She had spent 7 years managing things that were not hers to manage, and she was done. The children visited. Zara came first, 3 weeks after the wedding, on a Saturday afternoon. She arrived with the specific, direct energy of a young woman who has been building toward something and has decided the time has come. She sat at Adanna's kitchen table in the new flat and she looked at the new dishes and the new plant and the books on the shelf and the quality of the space. The specific quality of a room that has been arranged by someone for themselves alone, and something in her face shifted. Something that might have been relief. She said, "It looks like you here." Adanna said, "That is the intention." Zara looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up. "I need to say something," she said. "And I need you to hear it as something I have been thinking about for a long time. Not just since the wedding. Before the wedding. Since I was old enough to understand what the last 7 years have actually been." Adanna waited. "You are not the nanny," Zara said. "You have never been the nanny. The nanny is the word for someone who came and did a job and went home at the end of the day. You did not come and do a job. You left your life and you came and you stayed and you gave everything and you never once made it about yourself." She paused. The words were arriving in the specific, careful order of someone who has been assembling them for a long time. "When Mama died, I was 11. I was old enough to understand what it meant and not old enough to survive it alone. You were there every morning when I woke up. You were there every night when I went to sleep. You were there for the things I could not say to my father because he was too broken to hold them, and for the things I could not say to my friends because they were too young to understand them." She paused again. "You raised me. You raised Marcus. You are the only mother Lily has ever had. And she called you Mama when she was 2 years old, and you let her, and I have never once seen you correct her, and that is—" She stopped. Her voice had acquired the specific texture of someone holding something that is becoming difficult to hold. "That is everything, Mama Adanna. That is everything." Adanna looked at her granddaughter, Sola's daughter, Sola's eyes, Sola's quality of doing things completely when she had decided to do them, and she felt the specific, complicated weight of a love that had been given freely and had just been received fully for the first time. She did not cry. She was not the crying kind. But she reached across the table and she put her hand over Zara's and she held it for a moment and the kitchen was quiet and the morning light came through the new window and it was enough. It was more than enough. "Thank you," Adanna said. Zara nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand in the brisk, unbothered way that was entirely Sola. Then she said, "Now, what are we going to do about Dad?" Adanna looked at her. "We?" she said. "We," Zara said. The same directness her grandmother had taught her. The same quality of doing things completely when the decision had been made. Adanna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you know." What Zara knew was considerable. She had been 11 when Sola died and 18 when she sat at Adanna's kitchen table, which meant she had spent 7 years watching a household operate with the specific attentiveness of a child who understands, earlier than she should have had to, that the adults around her are not fully managing everything and that someone needs to pay attention. She had watched Adanna arrive and not leave. She had watched James return to himself, the particular shape of that returning, the increments by which a man who has been very far away comes back. And she had noticed, with the accuracy of a child who loves a person and therefore sees them clearly, what had made the returning possible. She had noticed who was present every morning. She had noticed who stayed past the point where staying was convenient. She had noticed who arranged the school meetings and who attended the school plays and who sat outside Marcus's room at 2 in the morning and whose voice Lily had called Mama before she had the language to distinguish between the different kinds of love in a house. She had also, and this was the piece she had not told anyone, watched Nina arrive. She had watched the 14 months of Nina with the same attentiveness. She had watched the warm, genuine woman who loved her father and was good for him, and who had been handed an incomplete story and had worked from it faithfully and incorrectly. She had heard the word nanny the first time it was said in front of her, at a family dinner, 8 months before the wedding, when Nina had introduced Adanna to her own mother with the words, "This is Mrs. Cole, the wonderful woman who looked after the children," and she had seen Adanna's face do the thing it did when something landed that needed to be processed before it was addressed, that specific stillness that Zara had learned to read across 17 years of watching her grandmother manage things. She had not said anything that evening. She had told herself she would say something at a better time. The better time had not arrived before the speech. "I should have said something earlier," Zara said. She said it plainly, without the kind of self-flagellation that would have made it about herself rather than the information. "I kept waiting for the right moment and there was no right moment, and now the wrong moment has happened because I waited for the right one." Adanna looked at her. "You were not responsible for correcting it," she said. "No," Zara said. "But I was a witness to it and I said nothing, and that is something I am going to have to think about." This was so entirely Sola, the specific quality of holding yourself to account without collapsing into the account, that Adanna had to look away for a moment at the new plant on the windowsill. "Your father," Adanna said. "What does he know?" Zara thought about this. "He knows what happened," she said. "He knows the speech. He knows you left. He has been very quiet since." She paused. "He knows, I think. He is just not sure what to do with knowing." "That has always been true of him," Adanna said. "Yes," Zara said. "But usually there was someone to manage the knowing for him." The sentence sat on the table between them. Not as an accusation, Zara had not said it as an accusation. As an observation. The specific observation of a young woman who has been paying attention for 7 years and has just arrived at a conclusion. Adanna looked at her. "That," she said, "is exactly right." Zara nodded. They sat in the new kitchen in the new flat in the Saturday morning light, and they talked for 2 hours, and when Zara left she hugged Adanna at the door with both arms in the specific, complete way of someone who has decided to hold nothing back, and Adanna held her for a moment and smelled her hair. The hair she had been plaiting since Zara was 11, the hair that was Sola's hair, the hair of the continuation of a person she had loved more than she had known how to say, and then she let her go. Zara walked down the steps and turned at the bottom and said, "I am coming back next Saturday." "I know," Adanna said. She went back inside. She sat with her tea. She thought about what Zara had said, that there had always been someone to manage the knowing for James. She thought about what it meant that she had been that person, for 7 years without naming the role. She thought about what it meant that she was no longer that person and that James was now, for the first time in his adult life, required to sit with the full weight of something without someone adjacent to him quietly managing the weight. She thought, "This is not my problem to solve." And then she thought, "But it is my life that is at stake in how he solves it." Those were different things. She opened her book. She read for 3 hours. Nobody called. She noticed this and noted it and returned to her book. Marcus came on a Sunday 3 weeks after Zara. He was 15 and he came alone, which told her something. He had not been brought, had not been accompanied, had arranged his own transport across the city to his grandmother's new flat on a Sunday morning, which was the kind of initiative that Marcus expressed rarely and always meant. He sat at the kitchen table and he did not speak for several minutes. He looked at the plant. He looked at the books. He looked at the dishes. Then he said, "It smells different here." "Different from what?" Adanna said. "From the house," he said. "Our house smells like—" "It smells like the house. This smells like you." She looked at him. He was 15 and he had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes and the specific, considered quality of a boy who thinks before he speaks and is therefore worth waiting for. "Is that all right?" she said. "It's good," he said. And the word good carried everything. The 7 years, the night terrors, the hand held in the dark. The groundnut soup requested 3 times in a row because something was wrong at school and he did not know how else to say it. He was not there to make a speech. He was not there to say the large things because Marcus was not built for large things. He was built for precise things, for the specific and correctly weighted observation delivered at the exactly right moment. He had come because he needed to see her, because he needed to know the new flat and the new smell and the new dishes and to understand that she was all right. Not performing all right, actually all right, and because he was 15 and he processed by being present, and this was the most present he had been in 3 weeks. They ate together. She made rice because he always wanted rice, had always wanted rice, had requested rice at an implausible percentage of the dinners she had ever made for him. He ate 2 plates, which was also correct. Marcus ate in proportion to how much he was feeling, which meant a second plate was a sign of something large being processed. When he was done, he said, "Nina didn't know." "No," Adanna said. "She did not. She found out," he said. "After you left. Zara told her." Not Zara didn't. She wasn't angry about it. She just told her what the last 7 years actually looked like. Adanna was very still. "Nina cried," Marcus said. He said it the way he said all important things, plainly, with the exact right amount of weight and no more. "She came and found me in my room and she said she was sorry. She asked me to tell her what she didn't know and I told her. I told her everything." He looked at his empty plate. "Was that all right?" he said. Adanna looked at her grandson, Marcus at 15, Marcus at 8 reaching for her hand in the dark, Marcus at 2 years of processing and then the precise correct output delivered at the exact right moment. "That," she said, "was exactly right." He nodded. He looked relieved in the specific, quiet way of a boy who has done something significant and needed to know it was the correct thing. "She wants to call you," he said. "Nina. She asked me if I thought you would, if it was the right time." Adanna was quiet for a moment. "She can call," she said. "Okay," Marcus said. He helped her wash the plates, which he had done since he was 9 years old and which he had never stopped doing even in the years when James had a housekeeper who made it unnecessary, because Adanna had taught him that washing plates was not about the plates and he had understood this and had continued to demonstrate that he understood it. He left at 4 o'clock. At the door he said, not looking at her directly, which was also Marcus, the important things said to a point slightly beside the person, "I told Lily you would call her tonight." Adanna looked at him. "She has been asking about you every day," he said. "She does not really understand what happened. She just knows you are not in the house." "I will call her tonight," Adanna said. He nodded. He went down the steps. She watched him go. She closed the door. She stood in her flat with the late afternoon light on the new dishes and the new plant and the books that were waiting to be read and the specific, settled quality of a space that had become hers across the weeks of inhabiting it. And she thought about Nina wanting to call and about Marcus telling Lily she would call tonight and about Zara saying I am coming back next Saturday. And she understood that the shape of things was beginning to resolve. Not quickly, not simply, but the direction had changed. James had not called. He was still in his silence. She was, for the first time in a long time, in no hurry to reach into that silence and manage what she found there. She picked up the phone. She called Lily. Nina called on a Wednesday evening at 7:30. Adanna had been expecting the call. Not that evening specifically, but the call itself, since Marcus had told her it was coming and Marcus did not say things that were not accurate. She had thought about it across the days between Marcus's visit and the Wednesday, turning it over in the way she turned over all important things. Steadily, without hurrying, trying to understand what was needed from her in the space of it before the space arrived. She had decided that what was needed was honesty. Not performed forgiveness, not managed graciousness, not the specific version of acceptance that is really just swallowed anger presented in palatable form. Nina deserved honesty. Nina had acted in good faith with bad information and had caused harm she did not intend and was now trying to understand what she had done. That deserved to be met with something real. She answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Cole," Nina said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has prepared and then abandoned the preparation. Slightly rough at the edges, the smoothness of a planned opening replaced by the uneven texture of genuine feeling. "I have been trying to find the right way to begin this, and I don't think there is one, so I am just going to say, I am sorry. I am deeply, genuinely sorry. What I said in that speech was wrong, and I did not know it was wrong when I said it, and not knowing does not make it less wrong." Adanna listened. "Marcus told me," Nina said. "He came to me and he told me what the last 7 years actually were. Not the version I had, not the version James gave me when we met, which was not the full version. The version that was true." A pause. "And I want to be honest with you about something. When Marcus was telling me, I was sitting there and I was listening and I kept waiting for the moment where I would understand that I had been given accurate information and that the speech was simply, that it was a misunderstanding of emphasis. That moment did not come. What came instead was, I understood, sitting there, that I had been given a story about you that made you smaller than you were, and that I had used that story in front of 300 people and that you were sitting in that room when I did it." Another pause, longer. "I cannot undo that. I know that. What I can do is make sure that I never, from this day forward, describe you as anything other than what you are." Adanna was quiet for a moment. "What am I?" she said, not as a challenge, as a genuine question. She wanted to know what Nina's understanding was, whether Marcus had been thorough, whether the full shape of it had landed. Nina answered without hesitating. "You are the grandmother of those 3 children," she said. "You are the woman who left your own life and came and held theirs together for 7 years at a cost that no one adequately measured. You are the reason Zara survived the hardest years of her childhood with her wholeness intact. You are the reason Marcus is the kind of young man who can walk into a room and tell a truth that needs to be told. You are the only mother Lily has ever had." A beat. "And you are the person James should have described you as before he ever brought me into that house for the first time." The last sentence carried the specific weight of something that had been understood and not yet spoken aloud, and speaking it aloud was costing Nina something that she was spending anyway because she had decided it needed to be spent. Adanna sat with this. "You are a good woman," she said to Nina. "I have always thought so. I thought so the first night James brought you home, even when the word you used was not the right one." She paused. "You were working from what you were given. I do not hold you responsible for the gaps in what you were given." "James should have told me more," Nina said. "Yes," Adanna said. "He knows that," Nina said. He is very quiet. He is the kind of man who gets quiet when he is processing something that is too large for his usual tools." "I know," Adanna said. "I have known him for 12 years. A brief silence. The specific silence of 2 women who love the same family from different angles and are, for the first time, in the same conversation about it. "I would like to meet with you," Nina said. "Not for James. For I would like to understand what the last 7 years looked like properly. Not because I need to manage it or fix it or I just want to know. I want to have the full picture. I think I am owed the full picture, and I think you are owed someone who wants to have it." Adanna thought about this. "Saturday," she said. "Come here. I will make lunch." A small silence. Then, "Thank you, Mrs. Cole." "Adanna," she said. "I have always been Adanna." She could hear, in the breath on the other end of the line, something that might have been the beginning of tears held carefully back. "Adanna," Nina said. "Thank you." She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the Wednesday evening quiet of her flat, and she thought about what it meant to be fully seen by someone who had been, until very recently, part of the apparatus of her invisibility. She thought about the specific courage it had taken Nina to make that call. Not a managed call, not a legal language call, but a genuine one, rough-edged and honest and willing to say the hard thing rather than the smooth one. She had been right about Nina from the beginning. She went to make dinner. Nina came on Saturday and Adanna made groundnut soup. Not for a reason or not a reason she examined closely. She made it because it was what she made when she was welcoming someone into the serious part of a relationship, when the surface courtesies were behind them and what was needed was nourishment rather than performance. Nina arrived at 12:30 exactly, which told Adanna something about her. She brought nothing, no flowers, no gift, no offering that would have made the visit feel like a transaction, which told Adanna something else. She sat at the table and looked at the flat with the same careful attention she had given James's house on the first evening. Reading the space, understanding the person through what they had arranged around themselves. "It looks like you," Nina said. Adanna set the soup on the table. "That has been said before." They ate. They talked for 3 hours. Not all of it was difficult. Some of it was the natural conversation of two women who had things in common beyond the family that connected them. Nina had grown up in a household run by a woman with very similar qualities to Adanna's, a grandmother who had held things together with the specific, unglamorous thoroughness that women of that generation deployed without naming it. She understood, from the inside of her own childhood, what that kind of labor looked like and what it cost. She had not understood, until Marcus told her, that she was sitting adjacent to exactly that labor without seeing it. The difficult part was the part about James. Not because Nina was defending him, she was not. She was precise and honest, and she did not spend a single breath making excuses for the incomplete version of events she had been given. What was difficult was the fuller picture that emerged across 3 hours of honest conversation. The specific shape of James's management of Adanna's role across the 14 months of their relationship, the casual diminishment that had never been corrected and had therefore accumulated into a speech at a wedding that described a woman who had given everything as someone who had been helpful. "He is not a cruel man," Nina said. "I want to be clear that I know this." "I know it too," Adanna said. "Cruel men do not grieve the way he grieved. Cruel men do not come back from where he was." "But," Nina said, because she heard the but even when it was not spoken. "But kind men can still be oblivious," Adanna said. "And oblivion, sustained long enough, produces the same result as cruelty. The person in front of you is still invisible. The reason for the invisibility does not change the experience of it." Nina was quiet. "He loved her," Adanna said. Sola's name was not in the sentence, but it was in the room. "And he loves his children. And he accepted what I gave in the way that people accept things that have become structural, without examining them, because examining them would require acknowledging what it would mean if they stopped." She paused. "He let the story become Nanny because Nanny was a smaller story. And a smaller story is a more comfortable one for a person who would otherwise have to reckon with what he owes." Nina looked at her across the table. "What does he owe?" she said. Adanna considered this carefully. "Not money," she said. "Not a speech. Not a public correction, though that would have been right. What he owes is a reckoning, with himself, with what he accepted without examining, with the specific way he allowed the woman who held his family together to become invisible in the telling of his family's story." She paused. "He owes himself that honesty. And he owes me the conversation that comes after it." Nina nodded. "He will come," she said. "I do not say that to manage the situation or to promise something I cannot promise. I say it because I know him and because he is in his silence right now, and because the silence ends when the thing being processed has been fully processed. It has not been fully processed yet, but it will be." Adanna looked at her. "I know," she said. "I have been waiting for James to finish processing things for 12 years. Nina almost smiled. It was a complicated smile, the specific expression of a woman who is learning something about her husband that is both difficult and clarifying. When she left, she hugged Adanna at the door. A real hug, both arms, the kind that does not calculate its own duration. Adanna received it. "I will bring Lily next time," Nina said at the bottom of the steps. If you would like that." "I would like that very much," Adanna said. She watched Nina walk to her car. She closed the door. She sat with her tea. Something had shifted. Not resolved, resolution was still ahead, and she had not decided how much of it she wanted or on what terms. But shifted. The air in the story had changed quality. The direction, as she had felt weeks ago beginning to turn, had turned further. She opened her book. She read. She was entirely at peace. For now, that was enough. James came on a Friday evening 6 weeks after the wedding. He came without calling, which was unlike him. James was a man who called ahead, who respected the principle that people's time was their own and required notice before it was entered. He came without calling because he had understood, in the weeks of his silence, that calling would give him a way to prepare what he was going to say, and that preparing what he was going to say would produce a managed version of it, and that a managed version was not what this required. He had been to the flat before. He had helped Marcus find the address, had driven past it once to know where it was, had sat in his car outside it one evening 3 weeks after the wedding and then driven away without going up. He had not been ready then. He was ready now. He rang the bell. Adanna answered the door. She looked at him the way she had looked at him for 12 years, steadily, without performing a reaction, giving the full situation the honest attention it warranted. He looked like a man who had spent 6 weeks in a very small and uncomfortable room inside himself and had emerged from it not recovered but correctly changed. There were things in his face that had not been there before. She could not have named them all. She knew them when she saw them. "Come in," she said. She made tea he had not requested because that was what she did. He sat at her kitchen table. He looked at the flat. He looked at the dishes and the plant and the books on the shelf. "It looks like you," he said. "I know," she said. She set the tea in front of him. She sat down across from him. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "I have been trying to find the right way to begin this," he said. "And I have spent 6 weeks not finding it, so I am going to say the thing that is true and let the beginning take care of itself." He paused. "I did not see it. Not in the way that means I was looking and failed to notice, in the way that means I did not look. I did not examine what you were doing or what it cost or what it meant. I let the story of what you were become smaller and smaller, and I did not correct it because a smaller story was a more comfortable one for me, and I knew that, and I continued anyway." Another pause. His voice had the specific texture of a man who has arrived at something through genuine interior work rather than through the desire to produce an effect. That is not what you deserved. After everything, that is not what you deserved." Adanna listened. "Sola would have," he started. "Do not," Adanna said, quietly, firmly. "Do not use Sola. What you are accounting for now is yours to account for. It does not need her in it." He absorbed this. He nodded. "You are right," he said. "I am sorry. You are right." She waited. "I knew when I met Nina that the way I described you was not." He stopped. Started again. "The first time Nina called you the nanny, I should have corrected her. I let it pass because correcting it would have required me to describe what you actually were, and what you actually were was something that made me feel. It made me feel the size of what I had accepted without naming across 7 years, and I was not ready to feel that size." He paused. "That is not a reason. It is an explanation, and it is not a reason, and I know the difference." Adanna looked at him. "Yes," she said. "You do know the difference. That is what makes this conversation possible." He was quiet. "What I want to know," Adanna said, "is what you are going to do with what you now understand. Not for me, I am managing, but for those children. For the story they grow up with. For the way the last 7 years is told in that house going forward." James looked at her steadily. "They know," he said. "I have told them. I sat with each of them separately and I told them, in my own words, what those years were and what you gave and what it cost and what I failed to name. Zara did not need to be told. She already knew, and she told me in the way that Zara tells people things, which is completely and without softening." A small expression moved across his face at this. Something close to pride in his daughter's particular quality of directness. "Marcus said he was glad I was saying it. Lily," he paused. "Lily is 9. I told her that Mama Adanna was the person who had held our family together, and that she was not the nanny and would never be described as the nanny again, and Lily looked at me and said, 'I know, Dad. She is Mama Adanna.'" The kitchen was quiet. Adanna looked at the teacup in her hands. "She has always known," she said. "Yes," James said. "She has always known. She was 2 years old and she knew." Children always know the person who is actually there. The sentence sat between them with the full weight of 7 years in it. Nina came to see me, Adanna said. I know, he said. She told me. She told me everything about the conversation. He paused. She is a good woman. Yes, Adanna said. She is. She is angry at me, he said. She is. She expressed it precisely and without cruelty, and she is correct. She said that she walked into that house and was handed an incomplete story and used it faithfully, and that I was the person responsible for the incompleteness and that it was not acceptable. He looked at his tea. She was right. She is almost always right. Adanna was quiet for a moment. Then you have chosen well, she said. He looked up at her. Sola would have liked her, Adanna said. She would have argued with her about most things, and she would have liked her very much. She paused. I thought about this often across the 14 months, whether Sola would have liked her. I decided she would. Something moved across James's face that he did not try to manage. The specific expression of a man receiving something unexpected and generous from a direction he had not earned it from. Thank you, he said, very quietly. She nodded. Now, she said, ask me what you came to ask. He looked at her. He understood that she knew. She had always known what was underneath the conversation. That was the thing about Adanna that he had accepted for 12 years without fully seeing it and was only now beginning to see clearly. I want you in their lives, he said. Not as the nanny. Not as the wonderful support. As their grandmother. As Mama Adanna. Named correctly and described correctly and given the full weight and acknowledgement that. He stopped. I want Lily to grow up knowing exactly who you are and what you gave. I want Marcus to be able to tell his own children one day about the woman who sat outside his door at 2 in the morning. I want Zara to. She already knows everything. But I want her to be in a house where it is said out loud. He paused. I am asking if you are willing to be present in their lives on those terms. Not on the terms of before, not subsumed into the household, not invisible in the daily operation. On your own terms. Named correctly. Adanna looked at him. She thought about what she had decided in the weeks since the wedding. She thought about Lily asking when she was coming home and Marcus and his 2 plates of rice and Zara arriving with her mother's eyes and saying everything with the specific, complete honesty that was entirely Sola. She thought about the new flat and the new dishes and the plant on the windowsill and the Thursday group and the books being read and the specific, recovered quality of a life being lived by its actual owner. She thought about what it meant to say yes on her own terms rather than on anyone else's. She thought about Lily. She thought. She was 2 years old. She called me Mama before she had the language to know what she was saying. She has called me Mama for 7 years and I have never corrected her and I never will. I will be present, she said. On my terms. My time is my own and I will spend it where I choose. I will not be the solution to every problem or the manager of every difficulty. I am not available for that anymore. She looked at him steadily. But I will be their grandmother. I will be present at the important things. I will be reachable when they need me. And I will be described correctly. Not in a speech, not in a formal statement, but in the ordinary daily language of your household. She paused. That is the agreement. James nodded. There was no performance in it. No relief that was really about him. Just the specific, clear acknowledgement of a man who has understood what has been asked and is agreeing to it. There is one more thing, Adanna said. He waited. Lily, she said. She calls me Mama. She has called me Mama since she was 2 years old. I am not her mother. She knows I am not her mother. But I am the person that word belongs to in her life, because her mother is not here, and she decided this herself at 2 years old and I accepted it and I will not change it. She looked at him. Is that acceptable to Nina? James was quiet for a moment. I asked her, he said, before I came. I told her what I was going to ask you and I asked her specifically about Lily and the word. He paused. She said, Lily's love is not a finite resource. One mama does not diminish another. She said, as long as Lily knows who her mother was and what she meant, the word can belong to more than one person. Adanna received this. She looked at her tea. Good, she said. She picked it up. She drank. James sat in the kitchen with her and they talked for another hour, about the children, about the company, about things that had accumulated across the 6 weeks of his silence that he had not had anyone to talk about with. Adanna listened. She asked questions. She gave her opinions where she had them. She did not manage anything. She was simply present in the way she had always been present, which was completely. When he left, he stood at the door and he said, "Thank you for hearing me." She looked at him. "Thank you for coming without preparing," she said. He nodded. He understood what she meant. He went down the steps. She closed the door. She stood in the flat for a moment. Then she went to the window and looked at the quiet street below and the evening light on the buildings and the ordinary Lagos world continuing in its ordinary and different way, and she thought about what had just been agreed and what it would look like going forward and whether she was glad. She was glad. Not in a simple way, nothing at 58 was simple. But she was glad in the layered, durable way that was available to her now, in the way that had satisfaction and rightness and the specific pleasure of having held a line until the line was respected. She picked up the phone. She called Lily. "Mama Adanna," Lily said. "I am coming to see you on Sunday," Adanna said. A brief silence. Then, with the specific whole-body happiness of a 9-year-old who has been waiting for something and has just received it, "Okay. Make sure you are ready," Adanna said. "I will be ready," Lily said. "I am always ready." This was not entirely true, as 9-year-olds are rarely ready in any consistent sense, but Adanna did not correct it. She ended the call. She sat with the evening. She was at peace. What happened after was not a tidy resolution. Adanna would have told you herself that she was suspicious of tidy resolutions, had spent 60 years understanding that the things that felt most true were the ones allowed to find their own form rather than forced into a shape that looked correct from outside. What happened was this, a recalibration. Slow, imperfect, genuine. Nina made good on every word she had said in the Wednesday phone call. The household shifted its language. The story that was told about the last 7 years changed, not in a grand public announcement, but in the daily, ordinary texture of how the family referred to that time and to Adanna's place in it. Visitors to the house were introduced to her correctly. The children's school, when it communicated with the family about Zara's university applications, received a letter from James that listed Adanna Cole as the children's grandmother and primary caregiver for the preceding 7 years. Nina added Adanna's name to the family photograph that she had commissioned at a professional studio 3 months after the wedding. A reshooting, unannounced, that Adanna learned about only when she arrived one Sunday to find a family photograph on the wall of the house that included her, standing beside James and Nina with the children arranged around them, taken in the good light of a weekend morning when everything was real and nothing was performed. She had stood in front of that photograph for a long time. Then she had said nothing and gone to find Lily. Zara left for university at the end of the year. She came to say goodbye at Adanna's flat, which she did before she said goodbye at the family house, which was an order of priority that James noted and accepted. She sat at the kitchen table one last time and she said, "I will call every week." Adanna said, "You will call when you can and I will be here when you do." Zara said, "That is not good enough, I am calling every week." Adanna looked at her. She said, "Every week, then." Zara hugged her at the door with both arms and then she left and Adanna stood in the doorway and watched her go, and she thought about Sola at 18 leaving for university and the way that particular leaving had felt. The specific mixture of pride and grief and the understanding that the world you have been building is large enough now to hold the person you were building it for. She went inside. She made tea. She was on balance, all right. Marcus turned 16 in October. He requested groundnut soup for his birthday dinner, which was held at Adanna's flat because he asked for it to be there, and Adanna made it and James and Nina came and Lily came and the 5 of them sat around the table in the flat that looked like Adanna and ate the soup that had been the language of Marcus's inner life since he was 8 years old, and someone made a joke that Adanna did not entirely hear but that made Lily laugh, the specific bright laugh of a 9-year-old who is entirely happy, and James looked at Adanna across the table with the expression of a man who has finally understood something he should have understood years ago and is living with both the understanding and the cost of its lateness. She looked back at him steadily. She passed him the rice. He took it. There is something this story wants to say before it closes. It is not about a man who failed to see clearly. Men fail to see clearly. That is not the story. It is not about a woman who was wronged at a wedding. The speech was a symptom, not the disease. That is not the story either. What this story is about is this: the specific, invisible labor of women who hold families together, who arrive in the morning and do not leave at the end of the day, who develop specific voices for specific children in the dark, who sublet their own lives in order to sustain someone else's, and the way that labor becomes structural and therefore invisible and therefore, eventually, nameable as something smaller than it is. Adanna Cole did not do what she did to be seen. She did it because Sola's children needed someone and she was the person available and willing. She would do it again without hesitation and without requiring gratitude. But she also understands now, and this is the thing the story wants to say, that freely given is not the same as invisibly given. That the giving does not require applause, but it does require accurate description. That allowing yourself to be made smaller than you are is not humility. It is participation in your own erasure. And that the moment you stop participating, the moment you set down your glass and pick up your bag and walk out of the room where you have been described incorrectly, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the correct one. There is a question this story leaves you with. Somewhere in your life there is a person who has been holding something together that you have never named. Not because you are cruel, you are not cruel. But because the thing has become structural. Because it is always there and always working and you have stopped examining it the way you stop examining the floor beneath your feet. They have not asked to be named. They do not do what they do for the naming. But naming is not for them. Naming is for you. It is how you understand what you have been given. It is how you stop, one day, from standing at a microphone in front of 300 people and calling the woman who raised your children the nanny. Who in your life has been holding something together in silence? And what would it cost you, right now, today, before another 7 years pass, to say their name out loud and mean the full weight of it?